And the key, I can control the slides here. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you're here. This has been a rather fascinating effort. We're just beginning year 2 of this effort to focus on the STEM talent pipeline. DoD is concerned with this because they're worried about whether there's going to be enough US citizens graduating with STEM degrees that will choose to work for the defense industrial base. And in fact, in talking with them at some length, they're also concerned whether the country will have enough STEM graduates, not just DoD. And so we've looked at the system rather comprehensively, as you'll see. I'm going to go for 10 minutes, then Dan will take over for 10 minutes. And after he and I have totally confused you, John Lombardi will come on and straighten everything out. So that's our plan. So let's see here. That's not going to work. How about enter? So just press that.
No, it works. Right. This one there.
Oh, okay. Okay. It's all right. So we have a multifaceted research plan between Georgetown, Purdue, and UMass. And I'll try to explain a little bit of the difference between the facets as we go along. But we're not all working on exactly the same thing, but we're working on complementary pieces of the puzzle. So 1042, which began in 21 and ended in 22, we focused on development of an economic model of higher education, an ecosystem to understand the drivers of the university system and within the research environment. We focused on the issue of talent identification and recruitment to promote the domestic and international workforce, and identification of select universities to support their achieving preeminence in strategic areas. And we looked at some top universities and some mid-level universities, as you'll see. This year, we're just getting started. First task force is engaging and nurturing promising high school students towards STEM and perhaps national security domains, and then modeling the policy infrastructure to better understand short and long-term impacts, both positive and negative, in the US STEM talent pipeline. As you're going to see shortly, this is an immensely complicated system and highly fragmented. Just one little tidbit, there were 14,000 independent school boards in the United States for public schools, each of which thinks they're expert in the whole top problem and knows what the right thing to do is. Okay, and they're all acting independent of each other. So what percentage of K through 12 students graduate STEM ready? Which means they've had Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, some of the sciences, chemistry, physics, etc. You'll see it's not high. What percentage of those students choose STEM college majors? A pretty high percentage choose STEM college majors. What percentage of them graduate with STEM degrees? Half graduate with STEM degrees. What percent are employed in the defense industrial base? Fairly small compared to what it used to be because of the opportunities in other domains. So I was talking with a Microsoft executive recently, and he hired a fresh computer science BS graduate from Morehouse, starting salary $180,000. So that's what we're competing with, okay? And I know many others who are going other parts of the industry and making 120, 130,000. How can these percentages be increased? What interventions? Both to get people interested in STEM education and then to increase retention and success. And what career interventions can we do to increase attraction and commitment to the defense industrial base? And as you're going to see, the most difficult challenge is K through 12. We know in college how to identify students that are not performing. We know how to help them perform. We know how to provide the support system. It's expensive. It's not free, but we know what to do. K through 12 is so fragmented that it's more difficult. Broader perspective, STEM graduate forces is critical to the defense industrial base. But we're also going to talk a bit about the skilled technical workforce. These are the people that are the welders, the electricians, the cybersecurity experts that don't have BS degrees, but have a high level of technical skills. And those jobs are often very hard to fill. And both of these are critical to the US economy. So there are a lot of definitions of STEM. We've adopted the one in green, which is sort of the standard one. But there are arguments that medicine should be added. So for example, when someone gets a bachelor's degree in engineering and goes to medical school, have we lost them? Or are they still in the STEM world? Okay. And then what about the arts? STEAM. What about all the game designers? Huge marketplace for that now. Okay, so you could take a broader perspective, but we focused on the one in green, the traditional one. What's the pipeline look like? Well, here we have a view. We start off with a K through 12 student population. Some proportion are STEM ready. Some proportion of those matriculate in STEM. Some proportion of those graduate in STEM. And then a significant portion go on to graduate school in STEM or business or medicine and law. I find it hard to consider that a failure, but they tend not to then be headed to the defense industrial base. You see down the bottom, a significant portion of students don't go to college at all. They may enter the workforce and eventually get into skilled technical workforce training. And we'll talk about that later on. John Lombardi will present some of our findings in that space. So here the Sankey diagrams show the where people transition. So we do understand what the transitions are. We do have data that shows us how things happen. And then we've got the K through 12 talent pipeline, which is amazingly diverse. I had a young man contact me this week. He wanted him to talk to me about his analysis of the COVID pandemic and what happened in each state, and show me his slides on the statistics of how states performed relative to each other. He's 14. I learned from my discussion with him, he finished high school when he was 7. So there's a wide range of talent in the country. And the interesting thing here is that STEM interest is highly influenced by STEM experiences. If you don't know anybody who was an engineer or scientist, chances of you deciding to major in that are not high. If you get some kind of experiences, so you get to appreciate STEM, that greatly increases the probabilities. So we're looking at the whole talent pipeline. Dan's going to talk more about the university pipeline, and we're in this next phase looking more at K through 12 as well. So there's all our probabilities. I won't bother to go over them again, okay? And we get some rough estimates from the literature. 16% of high school students are STEM ready. Now, is that because 84% are not interested? No, there's some of that, but there's a significant portion of high schools in the United States, especially in poorer areas, where they don't even offer the STEM courses. Like Algebra 1 is the highest level course given in high school. You're never going to get STEM ready if your school doesn't even offer the courses. 20% of high school students choose STEM majors, so not all of them are STEM ready. 50% graduate non-STEM. 60% take non-STEM jobs. But I've done a lot of interviewing with senior executives who were graduates from Georgia Tech when I was there. And 90% of them say their engineering skills is crucial to what they do at work, but their job title's got nothing to do with engineering. So I would still consider those STEM successes. We do need better evidence. We're working on this. to develop an evidence base. And so I'm not going to go through these, but what policy interventions would affect those probabilities? We understand what we could do. Stakeholder decision-making. So one thing we looked at was, how does students decide what to do? And this is a composite of a whole bunch of literature, a whole bunch of different kinds of studies. It's not like we have a single integrated database that tracks everything. We're much better off in healthcare, where we actually have much better data on everybody. But students choose an institution, and it's interesting, we've found from the literature that what they say were the reasons, if you look at their behaviors, weren't really the reasons. They were just trying to answer the questionnaire. So there's a bit of a problem between opinions and actual behaviors. How do they choose a major? So there was a study, very interesting. Why do Asian students do so much better in STEM than white or Hispanic or Black students? It turns out the biggest predictor is the degrees their parents have. And Asian students are much more likely to have parents who have college degrees or maybe even graduate degrees in STEM-related fields. And so they're more likely to pick those majors. The behavioral factors are kind of interesting. And I hadn't really thought about this, but to focus on your long-term college aspirations relative to this Saturday's football game is two very different time scales. And so a lot of students are not motivated to look out farther. And basically, you can see it's really enormously complicated. And lately I've been mentoring some different high school students whose parents have sent them to me. And they basically said, my son wants, our daughter wants to major in STEM, and the school's advice is terrible. It's just so weak. Will you talk to them? And so I've been doing that. And again, we see 36% end up with a job that says engineer in some type, but 90% of them are in jobs that actually benefit from them having been trained with engineering. That's from a National Academy study. How do universities make decisions? Okay, we've done many studies of this. John and I have collaborated quite a bit to look at universities in general, and many universities for each, tailored to each individual university. And basically the university leaders have a trade-off between pricing and brand value. Enhancing the brand value of a university means investing in the research enterprise, which has to be subsidized, okay, which increases your prices. So you decrease the attractiveness of the school from the point of view of price, at least, but you increase the attractiveness of the school from the point of view of the accomplishments of the faculty. And we've modeled a variety of universities in great detail, thanks to the data that John created at the Center for Managing University Performance. So we've looked at incentive structures. How do you incentivize students, institutions, employers? And what's the type of incentive? Opportunity versus recognition versus money. So we understand the alternative things we could do. And then student recruitment and retention. I've just got a couple slides here and then going to pass it on to Dan. He'll tell us how we really do this. If you don't have access to the high-level maths and science courses, you cannot become STEM ready, period. If you don't have other core courses, okay, so up to a quarter of our high schools just don't offer the courses that could be STEM ready. And there's also access by ethnicity. By the way, the best predictor of the quality of a school is zip code. Okay, if you look at the value of the housing in the school district, that'll tell you what the property taxes will be, and that's the kind of money that can go to the schools. If you're in a poor zip code, your school's going to struggle. Okay, it's got nothing to do with the quality of the students, although certainly that's a factor, but you just cannot afford to do the right things. And so you see here who has access to the full range of math and science courses by race. And you see Asians are number one because they won't live in a school district that doesn't offer those courses. Factors affecting retention, aptitude preparation, class size, etc. Interestingly, a lot of students switch out of STEM majors to non-STEM majors because they seem to get better grades in all the non-STEM courses. So they think I must be better at this. This is easier. And factors affecting retention. This is all from literature. More factors affecting retention. Can't go through all this in any detail, but I have done enough to pass it on to Dan.
I thought we might have to change the camera, Payuna, but I guess Bill and I must be close to the same height. That's great. I think it looks good. So certainly this has been a great project for me personally to be involved in. I'm very passionate about the topic, but also working with Bill and John, and I don't know that Bill mentioned one of John's colleagues, Mike Regano, in this project. Just amazing experience base at different levels of this pipeline, so to speak, and the university ecosystem. So it's been really great and a lot of fun. And certainly I'm not the singular member of the Purdue team. Cesare Guarniello is in the back. He's a part of this team. Dr. Joyce Main, who's a professor of engineering education, and actually someone who her main sort of corpus of research is in looking at access to large data sets that I'll mention here in a moment, and doing studies around those. So it's great to have Joyce on this team, and then 2 PhD students who've been very effective. So as Bill mentioned, the data is it's a typical story. There's lots of data, but it's quite scattered in this space compared to some others, and chunked in different ways that makes it difficult. But our sponsor, of course, is interested in the end in having us be creative and coming up with some ways supported by evidence and data in whatever way possible to make some recommendations on what the office that Louis leads, as well as the larger DoD enterprise, can do. What levers can they press that they're not pressing now? What programs, what influences? And so because of all of that, and really very natural to this problem, we decided to explore system dynamics to start to put together something with some substance that we can manipulate, experiment with, supported by data where possible, as well as sort of metadata analysis, et cetera. And so essentially, the pipeline, as Bill mentioned, is multifaceted. When you think about K through 12 all the way to the pipeline port, the upper part of his branching chart with the probabilities that goes to STEM graduates and then postgraduate school. Uh-oh, what happened there? There's bias in the AI manipulating the camera, a la Charles Clancy. But then also, of course, there's portions of the pipeline that John will talk about a bit that go into the skilled technical workforce. So to get started, our system dynamics model focus is on this college level STEM portion of the pipeline, and looking at both how people are attracted into that and how people make their way through that, and what might be policies or levers that will affect that. So certainly for the audience and the setup here, you won't be able to see all the text here, but I think you can see the boxes here. And again, Bill really set this up. But when you think about why students remain engaged in a STEM degree, there's fixed factors related to their gender, their ethnicity, their parents' educational background. And so again, the different viewpoints and sets of literature that we've been looking on as a team has really been very nice, because there's a lot to look at. And so we found some common things as well as some unique factors. Of course, the factors affected to the students and their performance as well. And then ultimately, again, our sponsor is interested in what factors, whether it's at the institution or in the federal government writ large or other forms of governance, can we provide interventions that can be actually shown to affect the retention. And that reference that we had there was a reference to the graphic there. Again, we found some great literature so far. So I mentioned my colleague Joyce Main. She actually, through her prior research, had access to several data sets that are quite highly restricted. And so it's sort of like a la some of our other problems that we work on in the CERC. One in particular here, the high school longitudinal study of 2009, HSLS, is data that, if Joyce didn't already have access, approved access through her previous research, it would take us a long time to get our hands on. So this is a longitudinal data set that looks at those factors that affected STEM major declaration. So it goes back a couple years into high school and then tracks students as they make their way through the programs. So we've done some initial regression analysis to find some correlations among these factors that I'll mention. And then certainly as we kick off the second year, we're also doing a meta-analysis to support the coefficients that we need for our system dynamics modeling that we can't get from the existing data sets. So here's just an example. The factors here in this particular regression analysis focused on the dependent variable of STEM major declaration. Okay, so what affects STEM major declaration? So these are ordered by the impact of the coefficient on the response from left to right, top to bottom. But we also highlighted those that are statistically significant to various degrees. So the ones with 3 asterisks and red font are those that are very statistically significant. So STEM courses taken, as Bill mentioned, is obviously top of the list there, Asian American, et cetera. So we're getting a very nice kind of cooperation between the various viewpoints that we've been able to tackle here. Okay, as I mentioned, the system dynamics model, you don't have to be an expert to appreciate in this project. One of the advantages of system dynamics is it looks at flows and feedbacks of various factors that affect the flows of something moving through some process. And so as antiseptic as that sounds, that's very appropriate for this thing where we're looking with human beings moving through a system. And actually, there's been a previous literature in which people have successfully used system dynamics models for this very purpose. And so we felt very confident that it was not only the right choice for a model, but others paved the way to some extent for us. And again, the last bullet here, what we're ultimately after for the sponsor especially is what can be done? What are the highest lever arms in this complex multi-loop dynamic in which they can make the biggest difference to increase the quality and or size, hopefully both, of this STEM pipeline. And then maybe we can actually translate this to other parts of the pipeline to look at positive outcomes of skilled technical workforce and others. All right, this is the ultimate unreadable slide, at least for this presentation here. But again, many of you have seen probably a system dynamics model before. So, maybe offline you can take a look at this. But what we tried to do with at least some larger text and some color is to show the main flows, and you can see there the choices of interest that incoming college students make, the factors that impact the flows in terms of their preparation with STEM courses related in high school, as well as other educational factors, the impact of various choices on the different flows. And then in green, certainly at the very beginning of this, is the raw data, process data that we can get from either surveys, data, regression models, et cetera. So again, our PhD students especially have done a really good job of establishing this model. And now we're moving ahead with making it applicable to some of the decisions we want to support And I should say another neat outcome of this is why between the year 1 and the year 2 over the summer, while we were waiting for contracts to get in place, our sponsor in the DoD had some summer interns. And so we gave the summer interns that were working for the sponsor the model, the system dynamics model, and we gave them some tutorials, and they actually used it, learned about it, and actually made great recommendations that are kind of kicking us off on how we're moving this forward this year. So students can do amazing things, especially breaking models that you give them to eventually learn how to improve them. So again, given all of that, and really in the interest of getting to John, I think hopefully I've convinced you this is the right way to go in terms of modeling. And so we're moving out on developing scenarios, hypotheses, and then running experiments with the model to try to justify some of these incentives that may work. And that's pretty much what we're doing there. So John, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. We'll see the next, look at this next slide here, the issue of participating in pre-collegiate and post high school activities is a critical issue, because every state has this necessity of finding a way to educate the students who graduate or even leave high school and want to seek employment in reasonably high-tech industries with skilled technical workforce jobs. And so what happens is that the states each develop their own program. And this is one of the key elements in this conversation, is that the data, while it's rich, is very complex, because each state has its own purposes and its own goals. So let's look at the next slide. And what we've been able to identify are 6 key elements for states that have had successful skilled technical workforce programs. And the keys here is that each state has to develop their own program, but if they meet each of these 6 targets, they have a greater chance of success. And each state's program is in a different stage of development. Some are very well elaborated and in close working relationships, and some are still in the initial stages. But the key is to have a collaborative ecosystem for skilled technical workforce, as this shows. So what you have to have is a model for structure, a model for training, a model that allows you to operate in a consistent funding fashion. Because if you start a program for skilled technical workforce and it has funding for 1 year, it will not succeed, because it'll wear out, the energy will go away, and it won't produce this reliable source of funding that's needed to pay both for training and equipment and technology. You have to have a good set of relationships between the education providers and the industry, so there's a match between the people who are produced with skilled technical training and the industries that need to employ them. This is one of the reasons why there is such a diversity of programs across the country, is because each state's industrial base is different. And so some focus on science and some focus on engineering, some of them focus on producing equipment, some of them focus on technology or computer science or something else. So you need to be able to have a close relationship between what the education providers can do to help produce this skilled technical workforce and what the industries in the state want to have happen, because it's that combination that allows the state to subsidize this process. Now, the strategic focus is clear, as we indicate above, because if the industry doesn't clearly define the job types, it's very hard to construct training programs that will produce people who can be immediately hired and go to work. And finally, well, not finally, but as the 5th item here, we have to have a target workforce to institutionalize this program. So while we're looking originally for entry-level positions, we have to see programs for retraining and upskilling. Once we get these skilled technical people hired for the first time, we need to have programs that move them to higher level positions and often lead them to additional educational activity. And finally, above all, we have to have an evaluation measures. We have to be able to know that what we do are actually meeting the needs of industry and the needs of the individuals who participate in these programs. Let's see the next slide. Or is that all of the slides? Nope. Okay, I think the key here is that obviously it's the K through 12 ecosystem that produces the people who will eventually be hired into skilled technical workforce training. These are people who do not go on to college for the most part. These are qualified students in the sense that they're interested. They want to go to work for a company and learn how to fix all kinds of new and complex equipment, and they're willing to do the training, but you have to understand where they come from and what they have. And you need evidence for the kind of transformation you're trying to achieve. That is, are we actually producing the students who need to be hired by industry, and is industry actually hiring them? And then once you get these priority factors done, you can talk about developing a more sustainable and structured model. So in the next steps of this project, in our second version of this conversation, we hope to be able to produce a more coherent set of examples from across the country. And we have some right now that are really very, very detailed with a great deal of background, but we have others that are just in the starting stages. So we hope to have, with a collaboration with state governments across the country, to find ways to stabilize this model and make it more effective. So let me give it back to you.
Thanks. Thanks, John. I think we're ready for questions.
Yeah, I
right?
want to add one little tidbit. In working with Mike and people who are involved with the skilled technical workforce, somehow I ended up talking with some people right down in the weeds who were involved with this, and asked them what they thought of it. And they said, well, I had a choice. I could go to college and probably get a non-STEM degree because I don't have the right background, and come out, and you may know the average starting income for non-STEM degree is about $30,000. That, or I could go into this program that trained me to go work for Pratt & Whitney or Electric Boat or whatever, and in a year, I'm making $60,000 and I have no debt. That's why I decided to do it. Okay, it's a really different value proposition, but enough. Tom?
Yeah, question. So you created this model for the US, which is kind of the dynamics of a system that's not successful. Have you thought about recreating this model for China or perhaps Japan, one of the Asian countries that seems to be more successful?
We have looked at Singapore and Germany and other places. We haven't thought about doing it for China, though. That's an interesting idea.
I would be really interested if their system dynamics model was slightly different than ours, right?
Well, I'll just add that my PhD student on this project is from Singapore. And actually, she worked for the Singapore government for 7 years. So A, I expect massive efficiency in everything she does. And B, she has insight on the Singapore model. So it might be an idea.
Let me also add to this question. The problem that we run into all the time is that the K-12 system in the United States is extraordinarily complex and highly differentiated, as Bill has indicated. And consequently, it makes comparisons to the international model to get insights that could be brought back to the US extremely difficult, because the underlying K-12 systems in every one of these countries is so different than the US. The US is really fragmented in a way that we don't see among more successful foreign collaborators.
Yeah, one good example is I don't know of any other country that relies on property taxes for public schools.
Well, an authority in the United States through K-12, as Bill indicated, is extremely fragmented. That is, individual school boards for very small jurisdictions in the United States have enormous power over the way in which the K-12 system operates, what courses are provided, whether the adequate preparation for STEM careers is included in the curriculum or for a high percentage of the students. And this makes a national policy for STEM creation considerably more difficult to change or modify across the country.
It seems like you divided up the professional education stream, one stream as professional education, and then another stream as this technical or a vocational education, welders, things like that, skilled crafts persons. Maybe there's another way to divide this up. People that can kind of adapt and understand situations. They think about it. Doesn't matter if they're doing welding or if they're doing quantum, they're trying to figure out some kind of equations of whatever it is, or biology, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. There's a certain mindset, like some kind of mindset that some people have and some people have developed, and other people, I mean, you could educate them from now to forever, and they still couldn't be creative. They still, for whatever reason, can't kind of figure stuff out. And you see this in both domains, craftspeople or trained professional scientists. There's some other dimension that lends to creativity and thinking about things that I don't know if maybe you captured it here, but I don't. There's something about that, and our rote, let's just say, math training is as a problem solving activity versus actually a very creative field. Just kind of gets blown away by the professionalization of that subject.
Yeah, I've encountered quite a few students who, in the skilled technical arena, that are actually very good at math for the math that matters in their jobs. But learning it just in principle, they don't find it interesting.
Learning it just in principle, that's also something that's fun for us, because you would have that mathematics is a great new achievement that maybe we're teaching them. And it's not really about, it's about something where, and then, sure, go ahead.
It's the microphone, but so the very first STEM textbook was written 2,044 years ago by a truth called the architectural. And it said, you can't be a good engineer unless you can envision the people you're going to build. And so I think, at least in the study we've been doing, arts is a good way to how these people into that. And I think we've lost that formula in this country.
Megan?
Oh, sorry.
Can I get two questions in? First one is, how do we know what the defense industry and the Department of Defense needs in the way of trained people? How do we assess that? And do they know? And the second thing is, do you think that internet-based coursework, MOOCs and all that, will play a role in displacing some of our classical educational pipelines?
Well, I think the answer to the second question is definitely, it already is. The way we've looked at the workforce, by the way, fortunately, DoD shared with us access to their workforce database. So we do know the background and age and other things of all their current employees. Now, the question is whether or not, as those people retire, you're going to replace them with the same disciplines or not. And the trends in this, I think, 25 years of data we have is that the percent engineers is going down slightly and the percent healthcare is going up.
Yeah, I mean, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, aerospace was really hot. It's into a big difference coming back a little bit now. It's not what it was my generation.
I do think, well, all employers, DoD, Defense Industrial Base or otherwise, are really moving much more to looking for the skills rather than the degree, program. At least in my experience, we get aerospace students out of my department going all over the place because they coded an AI to do their autonomous airplane or something.
You have to focus on what that target is.
Yeah,
Over time.
but it definitely is a new target. Go ahead.
Okay.
We have one more.
Well, he actually stole my first question, so that's okay. But my second question was actually going to be if you've been looking at some of the nonprofit organizations also, like for instance, I helped launch Geeks Rule, and where we do is we go around New York City and we help just bring some light on STEM and how pervasive it is to underprivileged schools all around New York City. And actually, one of the days that I went, the kids just of it and talked through that, and that engaged them greatly. So have you looked also at, and with Geeks Rule, we actually do in and out entry and exit forms as well. So just to kind of gauge the students in, you know, what they were actually learning, or if they were actually more inclined to even learn about STEM. And so if you've looked into maybe partnering with some of those organizations as well, I know it's a huge effort even within the DoD. There used to be this
We've
smart.
looked quite a bit at charter schools around the country,
Mhm.
which is an example, but we're cutting into
Cutting off.
Payuna's time, so.
That's all right. It's a great question because we'll be speaking about that a little bit in our next presentation. So great segue.
Wonderful.